Thank you. So yeah, the chapter 15 is called Shoot the Boer. It refers to the song Dubula Ibunu, which is the song, of course, with regard to which we went to court in 2011. And the song here, or the chapter here, talks about particularly, or more particularly about Julius Malema and the role that he has played in during his time at the ANC Youth League, and then also the economic freedom fighters, the rise of the economic freedom fighters, the establishment of the party, comments made by the economic freedom fighters. It looks at some of their policies, things that happened at the launch of the economic freedom fighters, and then I go to the song Shoot the Boer, and I discuss the process. I discuss the singing of the song in March 2010, and the build up to the eventual court case that happened in 2011. So that's what the chapter is about. I then talk about the murder of Eugene Ter Blanche, in as far as that is relevant to the topic of farm murders, given that he was also murdered on a farm, and what happened there, and what happened in the aftermath thereof. Yes, and then I conclude with a comment on the month of June 2010, which is the month in which there was not a single farm attack.
If I could then ask you to start, you have a section that's page 201, the middle is the rise and the level by. We should discuss that.
Yes, so the chapter starts with it's largely about Malema's time during at the ANC Youth League. We know his predecessor at the ANC Youth League was Fikile Mbalula, who's now Minister of Transport, I believe. At the time, he was the president of the ANC Youth League, and it was said that under his leadership, the ANC Youth League became more thuggish. That's a word that was used by one commentator. The ANC Youth League has always been you could say, a controversial youth movement, or the Afrikaans word is voortvarend. And I discussed that time, the time when Mbalula left and Julius Malema took over, and the comment I make is, if we use the word thuggish, then you can say Malema took the thuggishness to new heights. Fikile Mbalula said that at the time when he was still with the Youth League, that the Youth League is prepared to die for Zuma. And then Malema said, no, we're not prepared to die for Zuma, we are prepared to take up arms and kill for Zuma. And that's maybe a symbolic way of describing how things started escalating when Malema took over. I explain how he was criticized by former President Kgalema Motlanthe for his comments and his style. Then I go back a little bit. I talk about Malema when he was younger, when he was still with, I think that was when he was still with Kosas, when his comments with regard to Winnie Madikizela when she was found guilty on charges of fraud and theft, and his comments in 2009 that Helen Zille, who was at the time the leader of the DA, he called her a racist little girl who must remember that Zuma is her boss. And then an important thing to mention, he publicly called her a cockroach also, which is a very significant comment. And I mentioned here, perhaps I should read this. The cockroach comment was particularly striking, as it was the same word that was used by the Hutu of Rwanda to dehumanize the Tutsi minority as they were preparing for genocide. I then talk, an important point I make is in 2011 at a political rally near Kimberley, Malema made the comment. He said, once we agree that they, referring to white people, stole our land, we can agree that they are criminals and must be treated as such, which goes back to the brutal farmer stereotype and the point we made earlier about categorizing people simply on the color of their skin and attributing certain characteristics to them based on that.
You then go on to say that Malema was expelled from the ANC and formed the EFF. Can you tell us about what happened there?
Yes, so he was expelled from the ANC at the time. He was the main charge was his public attacks or criticisms on former President Jacob Zuma. So he, as a member of the ANC, was attacking the president of the ANC in the media, and he was eventually expelled as a result of that. And after that, he started what they call a radical leftist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist movement called the EFF, and it was founded in July 2013. What it said was one of its cardinal pillars is that the land must be expropriated without compensation. I also discussed the banners. There was a controversy about the banners, some of the banners that were displayed at the launch of the party. One of the banners said, and I quote, there are pictures of the banners, "A revolutionary must become a cold, killing machine motivated by pure hate," said the one banner. Another banner said, "Honeymoon is over for white people in South Africa." And then when the EFF was asked about this, I believe it was Mbuyiseni Ndlozi as the spokesperson, he then said that those were not official banners of the EFF, but he did not reject the message or the content of the banners. He just said those were not official EFF banners.
You then state that criminal charges have been laid against Mr. Malema on the basis that he encouraged people to illegally invade land. There was a hearing in Newcastle.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so he made a speech where he said, I think his exact words were, "If you see a beautiful piece of land, take it, it is yours." And he encouraged his supporters to engage in land invasions, and criminal charges were filed against him. And at Newcastle on 7 November 2016, he said, and this is a quote, "We are not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now. The rightful owners of the land are black people. No white person is a rightful owner of the land here in South Africa and the whole of the African continent."
How would you understand that quote?
Well, it's extremely alarming. I mean, I've said it. We've discussed a few things that are quite alarming. This is probably one of the most alarming comments. It's a vile threat to say, "I'm not calling for the slaughter of an entire section of our society based on the color of their skin, at least for now." In other words, one day I might start calling for their slaughter. And we know he's made jokes about this, and these people who are concerned about this, who are alarmed about this, he has described them as crybabies. But a comment like that is very, very serious, coming from the same person who has referred to people as cockroaches, who is now saying that simply based on the color of your skin, that by definition makes you a criminal. And by definition, simply based on the color of your skin, you have to be treated like a criminal, because you are all criminals. Everyone who has a particular skin color, just based on that mere fact, that makes them criminals. And the fact that he then goes further to say that, again, I quote, "No white person is a rightful owner of land here in South Africa and the whole of the African continent." And that it strengthens this narrative that it's not really about restitution of land, because the question is not how did you get the land. The question is not if you bought the land or what was the method in which you acquired the land. The question is, what is the color of your skin? And if the color of your skin, if you have a particular skin color, by definition, it doesn't matter. Other facts, other criteria are irrelevant. The only irrelevant criteria here is the color of your skin. And based on that, you are an illegitimate owner of that land, or your ownership of that land is illegitimate. This is... Sure.
Normally don't do this in court. Can both of you just come closer to me here? See, if I walk out before I walk out the bar, when you walk in the bar, when you walk out the bar, that's the standard of how we want to live in our lives. Thank you very much. Otherwise, as I say, that explanation is accepted. Thank you. You may proceed.
Mr. Roots, before your book, you state that Malema responded to criticism about the speech that he made at Newcastle. You have some extracts of that speech in the book. Would you read?
Yes. So he received criticism about this speech that we discussed now, and then he, at a later stage, he appeared in court in Bloemfontein, and outside the courtroom, he then made another speech. And what I'm about to read now are extracts from that speech he made it in Bloemfontein. He said, "My wish is to see de Klerk," referring to former President F.W. de Klerk, "my wish is to see de Klerk suffering for a very long time for the crimes they committed against black people. They were never punished for that. When we leave here, you see any beautiful piece of land, you will like it, occupy it. It belongs to you. It is your land. It is the land of your forefathers. It was the land that was taken from us by white people, by force, through genocide. They killed our people. We are not talking violence. We are not promoting violence. But I cannot guarantee the future. I am not a prophet. I am talking now. We are not carrying any weapons. I will never kill white people. Why should I kill them? I will never revenge for what they did. I am asking politely for the land to be returned. And if they don't return it, I cannot guarantee what will happen. Afrikaner boys, die poppe sal dans." Which is, of course, in translated, it's an Afrikaans idiom that to express that someone is going to be in trouble. "The EFF is coming for you, boy. Just pray. Pray to your ancestors. Pray to Malan. Pray to Verwoerd. Pray and ask them for EFF not to come into power. Because we come into power. Afrikaner male, this side. This is where you belong. We are not scared of Afrikaners. This is not your land. You must know your place. You are visitors here. And the long stay of visitors depends on their conduct. If you continue to misbehave, feeding our people to lions, putting our people who are still alive in the coffins, then you are applying for something else."
I'd like you to comment on a few things in particular. The first is this description of Afrikaners as visitors. Are you able to square that notion with the constitutional notion that South Africa is a nation which belongs to all who live in it?
No, I'm not able to square the two. To claim that someone, again, based on their ethnicity or their skin color, regardless of any other facts or criteria, is simply a visitor to a country and cannot be anything more than a visitor, it's just a very obvious case of double standards and a very obvious case of denouncing an entire section of society to the status of second-class citizens, of having less rights or fewer rights than the remaining portion of society.
The other question is, the term "they" in these statements appears to refer to white people at different times in history. In other words, it seems to look back into the past to say they white people committed acts of genocide, and they white people now deserve to be punished. How do you understand that idea?
Well, what he seems to be doing here is to take every possible negative attribute that he can find, or any possible atrocious deed committed by people who were white at some stage in history, and then attributing that to the entire group and saying, well, this is what you people did. In other words, when he says they, he talks about the group of white people, and then he says that white people have to be punished or have to carry the consequences or they have to fix what they did. So it's presenting it as if it's just one homogeneous group and everyone is equally guilty. Of course, he's not applying that logic to good work that have been done and saying, well, this white person did this incredible work or played this significant role in building society, and therefore we should be grateful to white people. He wouldn't say something like that. He would only apply it in a one direction fashion by saying that if a white person, a person who happens to be white, did something atrocious, the argument is, look at what white people did, and therefore white people, in other words the entire group, have to be punished.
What is your view on the notion of collective punishment?
It has been, the idea of collective punishment has been the starting block of, probably you could say, the worst atrocities that have been committed in the past century. All right. I'm saying the notion of collective punishment, in other words, punishing people simply because they belong to a particular group, has been a starting block of some of the worst atrocities that have been committed in the past century. Is in other words, denouncing people or degrading them simply because they belong to a particular group, regardless of whether that person did anything wrong. That person has to be punished because someone who might look like that person did something wrong.
If I could ask you to, at page 205, you have a paragraph there where you talk about the number of farm murders that had occurred in the month following Mr. Lamb's speech. Could you discuss this?
Yes. So I write there on page 205, as is the case with the ANC's leadership, Malema's hate speech is usually directed at white people in general, but importantly also to a certain cultural ethnic group in particular, the Afrikaners or the Boers. In the month following Malema's speech about white people and Afrikaners in Newcastle, 12 farm murders were committed, as opposed to the monthly average of 6.25 for that year. This constitutes an upward variance of 92% in farm murders. Would you like me to continue?
Yes, then make reference to a further political speech on this.
Yes. Then on 28 February 2018, while speaking at a political gathering in Soweto, in Gauteng, Malema reiterated. He said, "We don't back whites. We don't care about their feelings. They have made us suffer for a very long time. It's our turn now. They must be happy we are not beating them up. They must be happy we are not calling for genocide. We are exercising our political freedom and we are hurting them the most. We are exercising political power. It is more hurtful. It is more painful than a gun. It is more painful than a spear. We hurt you and take from you without a drop of blood."
Can I ask you about this? How do you understand the speech which seems to discuss calls for genocide and then appears to retreat from that? Just with, say, we're calling for this, but we're not calling for this. How do you understand it?
Yes, there's if I understand your question correctly, there's a debating strategy that's called the Mott and Bailey strategy. And it's something that politicians especially tend to do. And it refers to the old medieval castles where there's the bailey on top and there's the moat at the bottom. There's the big area walled around the castle where if the castle is attacked, that's where the fight usually happens. And then when you lose that fight in the bottom part of the castle, you could say, you can then still retreat to a second segment that is more fortified. And then you can continue the fight from there. And in public speaking or political speaking, what that means when you apply that is you make a very atrocious statement. In other words, that's the first area, the first arena of the fight. You say something that is very atrocious, and then when you get attacked for that, you leave sort of the back door open and you move to a second space, and then you say, no, well, actually what I said there was not really what I meant, but the damage has already been done by saying that. And then you try to present your initial comment as if you actually meant something else, or you actually said something else than what you actually said. And that's the typical thing that we see with these type of comments, is he's clearly saying, he literally said in the speech, he said that his intention is to hurt people based on the color of their skin. He said it explicitly. And this was actually, you could almost say this was sort of the Bailey part, where he was sort of retracting or attempting to retract that, or presenting what he initially said. Because he's saying, what he initially said is he made several comments about, it's also in the book, slitting the throat of whiteness and making comments as such, and then saying, basically what he's saying is you should behave, because if you don't, we're going to call for a genocide. That's what he said. We're not calling for genocide, at least for now. In other words, one day we might change our minds and we might start calling for genocide. And it's up to you whether that happens or not, because I can't guarantee the future. That's the line of reasoning he takes. And now even when he's trying to contextualize what he's saying, he's still, and if you go to the definition of hate speech, I mean it's up to the court to interpret that, which talks about hurtfulness and being harmful. And he's saying that his intention is to hurt this section of society, even if it's not physically, which it might be if they don't behave, even if it's just emotionally or psychologically, the goal is to hurt them. He makes it very clear in this speech in particular.
Can I just understand, I missed something else you said the Martin strategy consists of two levels.
Yes.
There's a level where there's general war, and once you get defeated, you move to the next level.
Yes.
If you can correctly, it means there are two phases to the strategy.
Correct.
Now, what you read, that relates to the petition you read, starting from on the 28th of February 2018, that is in relation to the expedition.
Yes.
Now, just explain to me, because as I see it seemed to be related to one particular incident. There are no two incidences. So can you just go through it again, because you explain to what they had?
Oh, okay. Oh, you mean in terms of what I call the Martin Bailey strategy?
In terms of the speech and how it fits into the Martin Bailey strategy.
Yes. So the Martin Bailey strategy is essentially you have the battle in the arena below the castle, in the walled-in area, and then you can retreat. When you lose that battle, you retreat to a different position, and you continue the fight from a different position. And that is maybe a better example is when you make a claim by saying something like, we have to attack these people, we have to hurt them, and then you get severely criticized for that, and you feel like, at least in the public arena, in the public opinion, you might be losing the fight because there's a backlash to what you said. Then you come back and you say, no, I only meant it figuratively, I didn't mean it literally. So now you are sort of reframing what you initially said in a way to continue this fight that you started, but you've almost backed down a little bit, but you still, without repudiating what you said, you're trying to put it in a different context.
The Martin Bailey strategy, that part of it is, as you said, that an extreme statement can be made, which with room to maneuver back to try and clarify the extreme statement as being less extreme, to move back to that podcast. But in the event that there is no public criticism, what then happens?
Yes, it's essentially a balance of forces strategy. So you make an extreme statement, and you see how the public reacts to that statement. If there's not a significant backlash, in a way it means that you won that fight in that arena, and you don't need to retreat from your position. If you find that the balance of forces is tilting against you for being too extreme, you then say, no, well, let me clarify what I said, and then you sort of, in a way, without retracting what you said, without apologizing, you're saying, no, actually I meant something different. But if there's not that backlash, then you don't need to clarify that. You can stick to your initial statement without having to retreat.
At page 206, you go on to discuss, hitting the shoot the word. You talk about the song Blue Moon. Can you discuss some of that?
Yes, so this song became part of the public. It became the public's attention was focused on this song from the 9th of March 2010, when Mr. Malema was addressing a crowd of supporters at the University of Johannesburg. And he made a speech, and then he burst into song. And then the song he sung was a song called Dubula Ibunu, which the song is sometimes also called Ayasaba Magwala. And if you translate it, there's a translation of the song which we asked at Afriforum, we asked a professional language practitioner at the University of Johannesburg to translate the song. So it's not an amateur translation, it's a professional translation. And you can the professional translations is, I'll read the English translation. The lyrics are, they are scared, the cowards, shoot the boer or shoot a boer, they rape these dogs. There's also a translation that says they rob these dogs, depending on whether, I assume whether the ziarapa is, if it means rape or rob. I'm not an expert in Zulu, but I've heard a different translation which says these. I've heard a translation that says these dogs are rapists, and then I've heard a translation that says these dogs are robbers, or they steal from us, these dogs. But this is an official professional translation of the lyrics.
You then have a quote from Maletsi Mbeki, who's the brother of former President Thabo Mbeki. Can you state what he said to that song?
Yes, he was quite critical, Maletsi Mbeki, of the song, and he said that what Malema was doing was nothing more than a call for the slaughter of Afrikaners, and he basically called on Malema to stop doing this.
Then refer to incidents of farm attacks that had occurred within days.
Yes.
Singing the song. Can you describe that?
Yes. So again, as was the case with Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, which we discussed earlier, this was a highly publicized event. There was an uproar. It was people were talking about this in March 2010, and following that, in the weeks that followed, farm attacks increased. Within days after Malema singing of the song at UJ, the University of Johannesburg, at least 2 farmers were murdered. And I'm describing what happened here. An unknown number of attackers fired multiple shotgun blasts through the bedroom window of a Potchefstroom farmhouse at around midnight, wounding a sleeping 46-year-old farmer in his back. The attackers did not attempt to break into the farmhouse or steal anything. This attack came one day after 5 men had overpowered 65-year-old Jan Wheeler in his bedroom, stabbing him repeatedly before shooting him multiple times. This was the 36th violent farm attack in Limpopo in just over 4 months.
Then go on to describe how, say, you then go on to describe how a supporter of Mr. Malema reacted to this, to the farm attack.
Yes, I remember this vividly, and I remember this was also something that people spoke about, especially Afriforum members and especially people in the the farming community was particularly alarmed by this. There was a Malema supporter who started publishing updates about farm attacks on Julius Malema's Facebook page every few hours. At that stage, there was about 12,000 followers of the page, and one of the posts stated, 3,000 farmers dead since '94. We lost more people than that. We are far from being even. So kill the boer, kill the farmer. Maybe I can continue. In another post, the same person, the same Malema supporter, wrote that 8 farmers had been murdered on farms in Limpopo since the beginning of February 2010. When asked about his intentions behind the post, he responded that he had never killed anyone, but that he did not have any sympathy for the farmers who were murdered. And then he said, sue me for not shedding a tear. Then there was another Malema supporter who posted on his public page. If you want me, I can quote the post. He said, and apologies for the language, he said, "You fucking white pigs. Malema is our leader. He will kill Zuma within 6 weeks. Look ahead, my fellow black people. We will then take our land and every trespasser, namely white whores. We will rape them and rape them until the last breath is out. White kids will be burned, especially those in Pretoria and the Vrystaat. Men will be tortured while I take a video clip and spread it on YouTube. Colin, we will stand together and rape those fuckers. It's true what Malema said. Silently, we shall kill them. Police will stand together. Our leader will lead us to take our land over. Mandela will smile again. White Nayers, we are coming for you. Households will be broken into and families will be slaughtered."
Was there a reaction from Mr. Malema to these statements?
I remember that there were attempts to get him or the EFF, or not the EFF, him or his supporters, the ANC Youth League, to respond to these comments, but they did not have there was no public response. Or more importantly, there was no rejection or condemnation of these type of comments that I could find anywhere.
Says the screenshot which has been referred to was taken from the Facebook page of Mr. Jesus.
I wish publishers would be very sympathetic to some as your age. But the font that you see, what
it's footnote 40 on page 373. Now that's a footnote to the extract that I was just referred to by the witness. The practical difficulty we have, and what I would have done is I get lost a lot with this evidence because I've been making notes frantically where there's cross-reference or no reference at all to the factual allegations. So the case in point here is, first and foremost, I do not understand, and my client will confirm when he gets here, that it does not have Facebook. One. The second is that it's a screenshot from 2010, and the evidence by witnesses that he contacted the EFF to find out or to comment on this. At the time, the EFF did not exist. So just for all intents and purposes, your lordship, and this is my appeal to my learned friend, that when contentious issues such as this arise, will be directed to the evidence, independent and verifiable evidence of the allegations being made. Otherwise, we get lost. That's what it is. Yes, just for clarity's sake, from what I understand Mr. Roots' testimony to be, he stated that the EFF said you didn't contact the EFF because you said you contacted. The question was about Mr. Malema's response.
Yes, I did say the EFF, but I misspoke. So I said there was attempts to get a response from the EFF, and then I said, well, not the EFF. It was, I think I said Malema's team or the ANC Youth League. But there was an attempt. I remember particularly there was an attempt to get comments about this post. Oh, okay.
You attempted to contact EFF or attempted to contact
No, it was not me who tried to contact them, but I do remember at the time there were news reports about this, and there was attempts to get a comment about these comments, not from the EFF, because the EFF did not exist at the time. It was comments. I assume then it was comments. It was an attempt to get comment from the ANC Youth League. You could say it would be accurate to say comments from Malema's office, Mr. Malema's office.
You said you just looked at there was never a response.
There was no response, or more particularly no condemnation of these comments that I could find anywhere. I remember this at the time when it happened. I remember following this story in 2010, and I remember when I was writing this book, I went back, and not in 2010 nor in 2017 when I was writing this book could I find any condemnation or rejection of this type of language by Mr. Malema or the EFF, who then later did actually exist. Okay.
You said at the time the EFF was not in existence.
Yes.
But you just not say, and I think that's what they.
Yeah. No, what I said now is when I was writing the book, which was at a time when the EFF did exist, I went back and I tried to find a rejection or a condemnation of this type of language, and I couldn't find it from the ANC Youth League at the time, nor could I find it from the EFF after the EFF was established.
You mentioned that there was a gathering Mary Fitzgerald Square in March of 2010 in response to the singing of this song. As far as I can tell, it's a gathering organized by Afriforum Youth. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, in 2010.
Can you tell us what the purpose of that gathering was and what it was for?
It was a protest gathering that we organized. I was in charge of that event. A protest gathering to protest the singing of such songs. And the attempt was to bring it under the attention of Mr. Malema, who was at the time president of the ANC Youth League, that farm murders is a very serious problem and farm attacks is a very serious problem in South Africa, and that it is extremely reckless to sing songs such as Dubula Ibunu within a broader context of farmers actually being killed, and within a context of your supporters actively encouraging these murders while they support your right to sing these songs. So that was the context. That's why we organized this protest gathering.
And at this stage, had a Afriforum launched a complaint in the Equality Court about the song?
Yes. We have filed a complaint at the Equality Court, which turned out to be the case, the Afriforum versus Malema case, which was heard in 2011.
And in the book you state that there was a call for a meeting between Afriforum and ANC.
Yes, I received a call at some stage while we were organizing this protest gathering from Mr. Floyd Shivambu, who of course is one of the leadership. I believe he's deputy president of the EFF at the moment. At that stage, as far as I recall, he was the spokesperson for the ANC Youth League. And I received a phone call from him. I think it was 2 days before the protest march. It was very close to the day of the march. And he said to me, they want to speak with us. And he just said to me, bring your leadership and come to Lethuli House. Which turned out to be, I didn't know who to expect or what's going to happen. So I brought a few people with, and eventually turned out to be a meeting with Mr. Malema and Mr. Shivambu, and I believe the other person's name is Stephen Gubeni, who was involved with the NYDA at the time.
And what was the outcome of that meeting?
The meeting was quite interesting. Again, we didn't know what to prepare. They just said, well, let's talk about this gathering. And our agenda was to get Mr. Malema or someone from the ANC Youth League leadership to sign a document that acknowledges that they are aware of the protest march and that they will accept our memorandum. Perhaps what I can add, just to give context to the march and the meeting, is shortly before that, a few weeks before that, I think, there was a television debate about this song, about the song Shoot the Boer, between myself and Mr. Shivambu and one or two other people from other organizations. And I don't remember if it was during the debate. I believe it was after the debate. Just as the debate ended, Mr. Shivambu said to me that we must protest. We must organize a protest march to Lethuli House, because to him, and he explained it to me, that the idea of white people marching, protesting in the street in front of Lethuli House is really, to him, a symbol or a metaphor or a signal that black people are now truly in power. If you have the people sitting in Lethuli House and the white people are protesting outside. And then I responded and I said to him, well, we have already filed notice with the Johannesburg municipality, the government, for a protest march. So it's good to hear you saying that you welcome that, because we would like for you to sign a document that you will accept our memorandum. And he said yes. So that's the context. And then at this meeting, there was an interesting discussion. Initially, they asked us to cancel the protest march. Mr. Malema, there was a debate about racism and race relations, and I remember Mr. Malema said to me that there's no such thing as a rich black person. There's no such thing as a black person who is wealthy. Every black person is poor, and every white person is wealthy or rich. And I sort of laughed, and I said to him, that's obviously not true. And he said to me, name me one example of a wealthy black person. And I said to him, well, you are a wealthy black person. And then he said, no, I'm not a wealthy black person because I owe the bank money. And I said to him, yes, well, don't you think white people who are wealthy also owe the bank money? And he said, no, white people own the bank. And so that was his line of reasoning. They asked us to cancel the protest march, and I said to him, we are prepared to cancel the protest march if they are prepared to say that they will stop singing Dubula Ibunu. If they stop singing the song, there's no point in us marching. And Mr. Malema said he will never do that. He will never stop singing the song. And Mr. Shivambu then said to me that the word Ibunu does not mean farmer. And I don't speak Zulu. I remember he took my notebook with his pen and he wrote down a word in Zulu, and he said, this is the Zulu word for farmer. And I said to him, well, what does Ibunu then mean? And he said it means Afrikaner or Boer. So he said to me, this is not a song about, what he essentially said was, this is not a song about killing farmers. This is a song about shooting the Boers. In other words, the Afrikaners or the cultural community. Eventually, I believe at one stage, well, they started singing the song then, we were sitting at this table and they started singing the song and dancing. And I at one stage said during this meeting that I think we are wasting each other's time, because they're not going to stop singing the song, so that means that we're not prepared, we're not prepared to withdraw, because the discussion was, are we going to cancel the protest march? And so I said, we're not going to do that. And I said, why don't you just sign the paper that you're going to accept our memorandum? And then Mr. Malema said, they're not going to sign it, because they're not going to accept our memorandum. To which I responded, that's okay. If you don't want to accept the memorandum, we'll continue with the march. We'll just march to Luthuli House, and we'll hand in the memorandum at reception if you don't come out. Mr. Malema then said to me, he said to me, remember what happened to the IFP when they went to Shell House in 1994. He said, if you come to Luthuli House tomorrow, what happened to the IFP at Shell House is going to happen to you. And at that moment, I was not sure what he was referring to, and of course, he was referring to the Shell House massacre, when the IFP, back then I believe it was still in Qatar, when they protested outside Luthuli House, and there was a massacre, and if memory serves me right, 19 people were killed on that day.
Did you then proceed with the protest?
Yes, we had to change our plans, the logistics for the protest. The protest continued, and that's why Mary Fitzgerald Square is significant, because it's a square that is a few blocks away from Luthuli House, not far from where we are now. And so we had the protest there, and we decided not to march to Luthuli House because there was an actual threat that we will be shot. Or at least, to use his exact words, what happened to the IFP is going to happen to us if we go there. So we decided not to go to Luthuli House. What we did do is we took a small contingent, a group of I think 4 or 5 people, who got into a vehicle and drove to Luthuli House to attempt to hand over the memorandum. So there was not a march to Luthuli House, there was a public protest gathering several blocks away, and then a small delegation drove to Luthuli House to hand over the memorandum.
And what happened at that juncture?
So the memorandum is, as I explained earlier, what the point of the march was. That's what we explained in the memorandum, and added to the memorandum was a list. You asked me, I think yesterday, about the book Land of Sorrow, and it was taken from that book, a list of the victims. If memory serves me right, I think there was 1,600 names on that list of people who have been murdered, victims of farm murders. And so the list, the idea was to say to them, listen, you are singing about shooting the Boers, and your supporters are talking about committing farm murders, but the reality is that these people are actually being murdered. And here's a list, here are the names of the people who have been murdered. What happened then, there was a crowd of, or a group of security guards or police officers, I'm not sure which one, might have been police officers, who were waiting at Luthuli House, who then told us that we cannot, our memorandum is not going to be accepted. We said to them that... Sure. Mm-hmm. Yes. That was an addendum to the memorandum, was a list of containing the names of people who have been murdered during farm attacks. Okay. So we were then told that we cannot hand over this memorandum. We explained to them that it is our understanding that Mr. Malema is refusing to accept the memorandum, as is the case with Mr. Shivambu and the leadership of the ANC Youth League, which is fine. We are then just going to drop the memorandum at reception. We're just going to hand it over in reception, or they can just, even if we can't do that, the security guards at the door can just take the memorandum. That would be sufficient. They, however, refused to do that, and I believe they were given instruction that no one should accept the memorandum. What then happened is one of our delegation then took the memorandum and sort of threw it over their heads into the building and said, well, if you're not going to take it, we're just going to leave it here. And they sort of dropped the memorandum into the building. Members of the Youth League, I don't know if it was staff members or just members, then threw the memorandum out into the streets. And the memorandum was not bound. It was just, especially the addendum, the names of the victims, was just a packet, you could say, a pile of papers with the names on that wasn't bound or stapled or anything like that. So when they threw the memorandum out, all the papers flew into the air, and as they came down, these representatives who were wearing ANC T-shirts came out and they started kicking the papers into the streets, stomping on the papers, and so forth. And I said to one of them, do you realize that you are now literally, stomping on the names of the victims? But that didn't have any effect. I didn't get a response.
Do you understand this engagement as a way of trying to resolve the issue without litigation, providing an opportunity for cessation of the singing?
Yes, well, that was our position from the beginning, and it was our position with this case as well, that litigation is, as far as we are concerned, a last resort. We don't even think that litigation is the most efficient way to deal with these type of problems. There are more efficient ways of dealing with these type of issues. The problem is when attempts to resolve issues like this through dialogue fails, when your options become fewer, at some stage you reach a point where you figure, well, litigation is now the best shot that we have. It's the best attempt that we can make to resolve this issue. In other words, there are better ways to deal with these issues, and we tried that back then, and we tried it now as well. So that's eventually why we ended up in court.
Can you then tell me a bit about those court proceedings, 2011 before Judge?
Yes, so the matter was in court in March, might have been March, I'm not sure which month, 2011. I'm sure it was 2011. Could have been the end of 2010. I know the judgment was eventually handed down I'm pretty sure in 2011. We can check the dates. It was in this court. It was in this court building upstairs. It was, I think, the first court case in South Africa that was live streamed, that people could follow live on TV. And I believe there was a channel created for that, for the court case on DSTV. It was a very high-profile case. Very senior members of the ruling party were there. Mr. Gwedi Mantashe was there. Mrs. Winnie Madikizela Mandela was there. Several others. Collins Chabani, who passed away since then, was there. And of course, Mr. Julius Malema and Mr. Floyd Chivambu and so forth were there. And I testified in that matter as well. So I don't know if there's something particular about that case you want me to elaborate on, I can.
You refer in the book, to page 214. You could read there where it says, in cross-examination.
Oh yes, I remember this quite clear. Mr. Malema eventually testified and he was cross-examined. And in cross-examination, Mr. Malema was asked why he was convinced. Maybe just some context firstly. Malema explained during his I don't know if it was his examination in chief. Page 214, in the middle of the book. So, just some context before I read this quote. Mr. Malema, during his testimony, explained, because the question was asked, why are you singing Dubula Ibunu? Why are you not singing Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer? And he then said, no, there's a reason why we sing this song and not that song. And then in cross-examination he was asked to explain why. Why does he think, because that's what he seemed to have suggested at the time, that it's wrong to sing kill the boer, kill the farmer, but it's not wrong to sing Dubula Ibunu. And this is a quote from the transcript. These were his exact words. So in cross-examination he was asked why he was convinced that it was inappropriate to sing kill the boer, kill the farmer, but acceptable to sing Dubula Ibunu. And his response was, I quote, "When we were discouraged to sing kill the boer, kill the farmer, the explanation was that the farmer is directed at a particular group of people. And what is worse is that farmers are not only whites. You are going to even kill people who are part of your struggle if you want to kill farmers. So you are actually pushing away the potential supporters of your struggle when you say kill the farmer." And I remember, and it's written here, Martin Brassey, who was cross-examining him, said, "Is that seriously your answer?" To which Mr. Malema responded, "Yes, that is my answer," quite angrily. Mr. Brassey then concluded that Malema believed that killing white people is not quite as bad as killing his own supporters.
And what was the outcome of Judge Lamont's decision?
The outcome of that case was that it was declared that the song Dubula Ibunu, or you could say the chant, it was argued in that case that it's more a chant than a song, but that was eventually declared to be hate speech.
I'd now like to turn to page 317 of chapter 22. And this chapter is entitled "The Question of Genocide." Could you give us a brief summary of this chapter?
Well, this chapter is probably the chapter in the book that has most been discussed after publication of this book.
317.
And so the purpose of this chapter is to answer the question, does farm murders or farm attacks constitute genocide? And it is something that we at Afriforum have been asked a lot, and we've also been accused frequently, regularly, you might even say continuously, that it is our position that farm murders constitute genocide. And we often get attacked, and it is often said that these people are lying, farm murders are not genocide, so stop complaining. And the purpose of this chapter was to provide an explanation as to why we are saying, to put it in writing with proper research, our argument as to why this is in fact not genocide. But the fact that it is not genocide does not mean that it is a very serious problem that should be taken seriously.
Could you give us an indication of what would constitute genocide?
You said the question of whether it's genocide is.
No, I'm saying that it's a question that was regularly posed to us, and we have regularly been accused of claiming that farm murders is a genocide, and then the argument is that we are exaggerating, it's not a genocide. And the fact of the matter is we agree that it is not genocide. So the purpose of this chapter is to explain why farm attacks or farm murders does not constitute genocide, but then also to say that the fact that it is not a genocide does not mean that it is not a very serious crisis, something that has to be resolved. You cannot simply say, oh, this is not a genocide, therefore we don't have to take it seriously.
So if I understand, in other words, your position is that there is not a white genocide.
That's correct. It is indeed our position that there is not a white genocide.
At page 319, you cite the 10 steps to genocide according to Stanford Genocide Watch.
Yes.
Just to read out what those steps are and then elaborate as you go as to what those steps mean.
Yes, so there's an organization called Genocide Watch in Washington, D.C. I think they are connected to the George Mason University. If memory serves me right, I don't see it written here. And it's led by a person called Dr. Gregory Stanton. And he works with the United Nations and he does research. He's an expert on the topic of genocide. And he and his organization has described or drafted what they describe as the 10 steps to genocide. And these are the 10 steps towards genocide as they explain. The first one, I only mention it sort of in passing because you can go into quite some detail about what these 10 steps mean and which countries are on which level and so forth. So the first one is classification, which broadly means that people are classified into different groups. The second step is symbolization, which my understanding, as I explain these steps, that at least is my understanding of these steps. I'm not an expert on the 10 steps to genocide, but that's my understanding of what this means. So the second step is symbolization, is when you start connecting symbols to particular groups, such as flags or logos or whatever. You start attributing certain symbols to certain groups. The third step is discrimination, when you start treating people differently. If they belong to a certain group, then they have to be treated in a particular way. If they belong to a different group, they should be treated differently. The fourth step is dehumanization. That is when you start saying things like, these people are cockroaches, or you start treating them as if they are not humans, or you start depicting them or describing them in ways that seem to suggest that they are somehow subhuman or not completely human. You refer to them as dogs or cockroaches or something like that. The fifth step is organization. So that's when you start organizing, you start mobilizing people around this cause. When you establish organizations and you say, this organization or this group or this party is developed or established with the aim of getting back at that group or taking action against that particular group. The sixth step is then polarization. That is polarizing society in different categories and encouraging hatred and friction within society, or taking over the public debate in that sense. The seventh step is preparation. So that's, you could say, a form of preparation towards genocide, or not necessarily towards genocide, a preparation of inflicting damage or hurting a particular community on a large scale. The eighth step is persecution. So that would be not necessarily, persecution is not always physical harm. It could be, it's more than discrimination. It's sort of pushing this community out, cleansing society from this community, or public persecution. The ninth step is extermination. That's the actual genocide, you could say. And then the 10th step is denial. That's when you deny that what happened is actually a genocide.
Could you then read out what you've written in the book after that as well?
After that table, or that block, the fact of the matter is that the debate on whether farm murders constitute genocide is misdirected and damaging to the campaign to stop this scourge. Farm murders do not constitute genocide for the simple reason that the phenomenon does not comply with the definition of genocide. Should I continue? The problem is that disproving the false claims of genocide leads some to believe that farm murders are not something to be concerned about. The fact that farm murders do not constitute genocide can in no way render this phenomenon less important, and should never lead a rational person to conclude that it is not a matter to be concerned about. we find that many argue that farm murders do not constitute genocide in an attempt to discredit those who are concerned about this phenomenon, implicitly concluding that it is not really a problem simply because it is not genocide. You are wrong, it's not genocide, so stop complaining, the argument goes.
Is the concern that it's to set up a straw man? In other words, to say you claim that this problem is a genocide, it's not a genocide, so therefore there is no problem.
That's exactly it, and we find that politicians have done that. We've since seen some public commentators do that, and they would sort of write articles. There's quite a few such articles that have been published. I've had many such radio interviews and so forth, where someone would say, "Let me explain to you why this is not a genocide," and then they explain why it's not a genocide, as if we've said that it is a genocide, and secondly, as if it is not a genocide, we don't need to be concerned. And neither of those is true, of course.
Has Afriforum ever responded to allegations that it alleges that there is a white genocide?
Yes, we have. We have filed numerous complaints with the press ombudsman in response to media outlets stating or claiming that it is our position that what is happening is a genocide, and we have won, I think, all of these complaints. I don't think we've ever filed a complaint in this regard with the press ombudsman that was not ruled in our favor. So there has been numerous media outlets that have publicly apologized to Afriforum for attributing this position to us.
You then mentioned what the definition of genocide is in terms of the UN's Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Could you state what genocide is in terms of that convention?
Yes, are you referring to the section that's quoted on page 320?
On 320, yes.
Yes. So that's the UN Convention that you mentioned. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group as such. And then there are 5 sub-points. A, killing members of the group. 2, or B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
Now, what I understand is your position that there is not a white genocide in South Africa, but could you explain why farm murders are condemnable nonetheless?
Yes. So there's this strange narrative, and we've seen it in other areas of the world as well, but where the argument is made that if it's not a genocide, or don't take it seriously, or don't be too alarmed because it's not a genocide. And as one commentator or someone I spoke to who has actually argued that this does amount to a genocide, I called this person during the writing of this book and I said, well, now I want to discuss this with you, explain to me the argument. And this person said to me, the problem with the discussion or the debate about genocide is it's only acknowledged to be genocide once genocide has happened. So once we all agree, okay, this was a genocide, then it's finished. And even during the Rwandan genocide, there was not consensus that what happened there was genocide, even despite the fact that people were running in the streets, slaughtering people en masse with machetes and so forth, by the tens of thousands and eventually hundreds of thousands. People were saying, no, well, this is not genocide. So the whole debate about genocide is sort of diverts the attention from the actual problem. And it is a very serious problem. And we don't have to wait. We don't have to say, no, let's wait until it's a genocide, and then we can do something about this, because it's a serious problem nonetheless. The same, it's the same way, for the same reason that gang-related violence is a serious problem, and we should do something about that. And there are many other priority crimes. Poaching of rhinos is a serious problem. No one's saying, well, there are still rhinos left. They haven't been exterminated, so why are you complaining? The fact is that it's a problem, it's a unique problem, and it requires a unique counter-strategy. That's our argument.
Could you elaborate on what you think that unique counter-strategy ought to be in the case of conflict?
Yes. So I write about that quite a bit towards the end of the book.
I can restate the question. Can you state what a unique counter-strategy ought to be in the case of conflict?
Yes. So towards the end of the book, I explain. So the first part of the book, which we have already discussed, is an explanation of why this should be recognized as a priority crime. In other words, it's a unique crime, and it should be responded to with a unique counter-strategy. Towards the end of the book, I venture to give some examples, suggestions on how it could be responded to. And there's actually a list of things that we believe could be done. If I can get to the page, I'm just going to read the headings without reading the whole section. So there's about 4 pages where I explain this, and it's on page 296 towards 299. So this is what we say, how this crime phenomenon should be prioritized. The first point is quarterly release of statistics. As I mentioned earlier, there was this whole issue, this controversy about not releasing statistics. So statistics should be released regularly. The second point is there should be continued independent research into this matter. The third point is that what I just call the commando promise must be fulfilled. And there's a longer discussion to be had about that, but the short version is we had the commando system in South Africa, which was disbanded in 2003. And at the time, when it was disbanded, former President Thabo Mbeki said, we're going to close down this system and we're going to replace it with a new system with the aim of protecting rural communities. But this new system was never put in place. So we're saying that if you close down the commando system for whatever reason, at least put something else in place. Then the fourth point is priority of the hawks. We're saying that farm murders, farm attacks should be a particular priority within the hawks, the special unit within the police. The fifth point is a partnership with civil society, that the police should partner more comprehensively with civil society and get civil society involved to combat this crime phenomenon. The sixth point is to revise the National Rural Safety Strategy to make it more particular, with a more focused attention on this crime phenomenon. The seventh point is to develop specialist rural safety units, in other words, to increase visibility in rural areas. The seventh point is to have a more holistic approach. What I mean by that, or what we mean by that, is that there should be some, let's call it a centralized office of the police that says, how are we going to respond to this crime phenomenon, as opposed to individual police stations responding to, just reacting to these crimes when they happen. The seventh point is victim support. There can be better support for the victims of these crimes. And then the 10th point is legislation. Legislation can be enacted to say, here's the, let's call it the Farm Attacks Prevention Act. Something like that could be developed, and civil society especially can contribute significantly to what an act like that can include.
In this chapter you discuss ethnic cleansing as a category that is different from genocide. Could you give us an indication of what ethnic cleansing is?
Yes, I think the easiest way to explain the difference between genocide and ethnic cleansing is actually a quote I found in my research about the difference between Adolf Hitler and Slobodan Milosevic. And the argument is that Adolf Hitler was involved with genocide and Slobodan Milosevic was involved with ethnic cleansing. Slobodan Milosevic, of course, from the former Yugoslavia. And the difference is that Adolf Hitler wanted to exterminate the Jews. He would have gone to, maybe I should read it. I see here's the quote. The quote is on page 327, where is it Shabas who wrote this? I think he's a human rights lawyer who explained this. He said, Hitler had the modest ambition of eliminating all Jews in Europe. But given the chance, he would have extended his murderous campaign to the rest of the world. Milosevic, on the other hand, wanted to drive the Muslims from Kosovo, although he seemed untroubled by the idea that they might live elsewhere, in Macedonia or Albania, for example. So genocide is to say these people have to be exterminated regardless of where they are. We have to go and find them and get rid of them. Ethnic cleansing is to say, is a way of saying we need to get them off our land, you could say. And if that means we have to kill them, that's okay. If that means we have to take their property and expel them from this country, that's also okay. If they live elsewhere, that's okay, as long as they just get out of our sight. That could mean driving them into the sea. If they get on boats and they travel elsewhere and they never come back, that's okay, as long as we cleanse this land from this section of society.
Now, is there an argument that in South Africa we are seeing signs that move not in the direction of genocide, but in the direction of ethnic?
Yes, that is one of the conclusions I reached towards the end of this chapter. Is if you want to compare the phenomenon of farm attacks and farm murders to one of these crimes against humanity, you could say, there's a stronger argument. It is not my argument or Afriforum's argument. Let me just clarify at first. It is not our argument that farm murders constitute ethnic cleansing. But there is a stronger argument to be made that this could lead to ethnic cleansing than to be made that this could lead to genocide. And the reason why I say this is ethnic cleansing typically manifests in people saying, we're going to take your land, we're going to chase you off the land. And if you leave our country, it typically includes comments like, you are just a visitor. Yeah. If you go, you can go back to your home, wherever that is. And if you go there, you know, we're all going to live in peace. Genocide says we're going to come after you and we're going to kill you. So claims about taking the land, you know, categorizing people simply based on the color of their skin and saying there's no such thing as a white person in this country who is not a visitor. These all have you could say it has the stench of ethnic cleansing. So if we are concerned about something, I think it's more realistic to be concerned of potential ethnic cleansing than potential genocide.
Are there particular examples that alarm you?
Yes, they are, and I believe I list them somewhere in the book.
Page 335.
Yes, that's it. So I list some examples, I think 12, yes. If you want, I can read them to you, which raises alarm bells when we think about the phenomenon of ethnic cleansing. There are 12 factors or variables or elements of this. The first is, or that resonate with the idea of ethnic cleansing. So the first is the destruction or the removal of Afrikaner statues and monuments. The second is hate speech by some of the most influential political leaders, including Julius Malema, members of parliament, members of cabinet, and even former President Jacob Zuma. The third, the comment by President Cyril Ramaphosa that Julius Malema has a home in the ANC shortly after Malema's comments that he intends to slit the throat of whiteness and that white people should be happy that he is not calling for genocide. The fourth, the as yet undenied comment by President Cyril Ramaphosa that white people have to be dealt with like boiling a frog alive, which is done by raising the temperature very slowly. 5, negative stereotyping of white farmers by influential political leaders, including members of parliament, members of cabinet, and even by President Cyril Ramaphosa, referring to certain comments he made. Number 6, the notion that minorities have less rights because they are fewer in number, as purported by former President Jacob Zuma, and the statement by the ruling party spokesperson that angry and disillusioned members of the coloured community shouldn't feel as if they have been reduced to the status of a minority community. This is something I discuss in more detail in the book. There was a coloured community protesting, I believe it was a language issue, and a spokesperson for the president said, this community should not feel as if they have been reduced to the status of a minority community. In other words, saying that minority communities have a reduced status. The 7th point, refusal to publicly reprimand those who commit hate speech towards white farmers in particular, and both the ANC and the EFF's willingness to go to court to protect their so-called right to sing songs in which the murder of Boers and white farmers in particular is encouraged. 8, the refusal to prioritize farm murders despite all the evidence that prioritization would be the most reasonable government response. 9, the scorning and ridiculing of those who call for the prioritizing of farm attacks, including even the victims of farm attacks and those whose loved ones have been murdered. 10, the claim that white farmers are land thieves and they should be treated as criminals by senior members of the ruling party. 11, disproportionate media reporting of incidents of violent crime where farmers are perpetrators, and severe underreporting in the media of incidents of violence where farmers are victims. This is particularly evident in the reporting of the state broadcaster, and I refer to a study in that regard. And then 12, the motion adopted in Parliament to review Section 25 of the Constitution, the Property Rights Clause, and other clauses where necessary, to make it possible for the state to expropriate land without compensation, and that this has to be done because, quote, whites stole the land, in spite of the inaccuracy of this comment.
My Lord, I have no further questions.
It's now going to 4.
I still will not be. Proposal to that we are adjourned.
Just remind you again, this